Good morning. Thanks, Brian. We're joined by Andre Taylor, your brother, Shay Taylor, shot and killed by Seattle police. Certainly that's why you have gotten on board with Initiative 940. Really quickly, do you have enough valid signatures to turn that in today?
We believe we do. We believe we will be turning in today approximately 100,000 signatures over the required amount of signatures that they're asking.
So enough signatures and a few left over for good measure.
Yes.
So this initiative has been painted in a couple different ways. On one hand, it's been painted to the public as something that's about preventing police shootings with a focus and an emphasis on providing training to police officers. And then on the other side of people, you have people who say this is just about being able to put police officers in prison easier. I want to read you a statement from the Washington Council of Police and Sheriffs, which we have. It says, we encourage everyone to read the actual language of the initiative and see for themselves that the true purpose is to put police officers in jail. Representative Morgan Irwin, who's a Seattle police officer, he put out a similar statement in an interview with us. He said it's not about police training, it's about making it easier to put cops in jail, and that's it. He went on to say, you're talking about an incredibly high-stress, high-stakes situation. Officers are already questioning themselves and how they do their jobs, and they're talking about removing the only protection we have. What do you say to them?
I think that's a false narrative of removing the only protection that they have. There is no state that has the malice language in it around the country, and officers are protected. It is highly unlikely that officers are charged in any other state when incidences like this happen. So I think that's a false narrative. I think it's important that we look at some of the data. Last year, 29 people were killed by officers in Washington state. It's not getting any better because this year, 42 people were killed. Just over this past week, 3 people were killed. The day before yesterday, 3 people were killed just over this past week by police officers. It is problematic. Every time we come to a place in our country where its citizens is demanding change, there's fear because of change, right? When this law was instituted in 1986, officers had fear because the law before 1986 was that an officer can shoot a fleeing felon in the back, and the Supreme Court said you can't do that. So there was fear then, as there is fear now, but the people have spoken, and we're saying that we want to see some change.
So I want to make sure that people understand what you bring up there. You talk about malice, which the law, and you're correct, Washington state, the only state in the country where a prosecutor would have to prove that an officer acted with malice when they shot and killed someone. So what you're proposing in this initiative, and the Washington Council of Police and Sheriffs has a good point. If you haven't read it, you ought to always read something that you want to vote. It's only 8 pages long. I've read it a million times. You're proposing instead a good faith standard for
a reasonable
police
officer
officers.
standard.
Can you talk about the difference between malice and what you're proposing in here?
Well, you hear a lot when people are explaining about how we want the law to work. They said, I even heard someone say earlier today that we want to make it easier to prosecute officers. That is not true.
But you can't argue that this would do that. This would make it easier to prosecute police officers who use death
I can
penalties.
argue that it won't make it easier, it'd make it possible.
Make it easier
possible.
than it is right now.
It'd make it possible because it's not possible. We have
it is possible if you can prove malice right now. If you can prove an officer went out and with malice shot and killed someone, then you could prosecute that.
In 30 years,
it is possible.
In 30 years, we have not been able to prove that. So
I just want to make sure we're not mixing the facts around. But
well, in 30 years, we haven't been able to prove malice.
It's hard. It is a high standard. No one can deny that.
It is almost impossible standard, and that's problematic, right? Because even with M. Burke and the John T. Williams case, we know that M. Burke was found to have violated police policy. And even though he violated police policy, the malice was the de facto immunity where we couldn't bring him up on charges, even though he violated police policy. That's problematic. It's not about attacking police officers. It's about everybody having some accountability in their action and their behavior.
I do want to make sure to get this question in before we're out of time. You know, I brought up earlier your brother, Shay Taylor. It was a shooting that was ruled justified by the police department, but it set you on this path forward to try to prevent shootings down the road, which is part of the goal of I-940. What would it mean for your family and for your brother Shay's memory to be able to get this either enacted into law or on the ballot for voters to look at?
It means a lot to my family. It means a lot to me, not just for Shay, but for Charlena and all the other families that have lost loved ones. What's more important is that I'm thinking about the future, and I'm thinking about children once this is passed, and we believe it will pass, will not have to face this type of scrutiny if an officer happens to do something inappropriate when he shoots someone. And I'm more concerned about the next generation fighting for the next generation. People often ask, how did you have the fortitude after experiencing so much pain? I said, it was me thinking about the future and thinking about children, all people's children. And I think that now that this is in the process, it's the first step. It doesn't fix everything. It's just a first step so we can continue to have the conversation and how we can come together as a country and to build that more perfect union.
Yeah, it's an important conversation, and I would hope that no one would disagree that it's always important. There's two aspects to this, the training and the change in the wording in state law. Even police officers should want additional training to deal with those who are going through mental health crises, additional training to help in de-escalation. So I hope that's a part of this, that everyone can agree on that. You know, the more training, the better for police officers. Really quickly, there's a couple things that can happen here once you guys turn those signatures in. Lawmakers could decide that they want to make this a law on their own.
Yes.
If they don't do that, it's going to go to voters. Do you anticipate that our state lawmakers are going to go ahead and put 940 into law on their own?
I'm hopeful that they will finally deal with this after many years that we've been discussing this in Washington State. But even with that hope, I'm preparing, the campaign is preparing for the ballot. We're hopeful, but we're preparing for the ballot.
All right, Andre Taylor, we appreciate your time. You and I have had
Brandon.
many opportunities to discuss, even before it got to this point, before you came up with 940, sort of your ideas for getting there. So we've seen it come full circle. So we're going to be tracking this regardless of what happens, whether lawmakers take action or whether it's going to be in the hands of voters. So Andre Taylor, thank you for your time this morning.
Okay.